Naruto exclusive videos lemon come out on my boosty. You can watch and subscribe. Link in the description. Enjoy watching. Description: it is clear to everyone that Naruto cannot live without adventures. But life after the war turned out in such a way that the famous blonde had to gather dust, gnawing on the granite of science, trampling her way to her dream. Boredom. True, it turned out that adventures also cannot live without Naruto. Take this, sign for it. The quest called Fall on Tobirama's Head begins. And in this set with Tobirama there are also Hashirama and Madara. Now it will definitely not be boring. Chapter 18. She survived. Hooray! So did Kakuzu. A less enthusiastic hooray, but still. The future remained unshakable. All that was left was to hope that Kakuzu would not recognize her. Although what was there to hope for? He did not recognize her then. If you believe that everything is cyclical. It's just that both of them did not know then that they had already fought once. Which meant that Naruto remained incognito for him. Well, no wonder. The screaming orange and black tracksuit was very different from the rags she wore now. As was her hairstyle. Back then, her hair was shorter and always gathered in two high ponytails, but now she did not gather it in ponytails at all. She was not given any hairpins or elastic bands here, and she herself has not bought them yet. The most obvious thing is her physique. Back then, she was an angular teenager, but now she has all those roundness and notorious curves that a typical girl in her 20s should have. So the only clear landmark is the stripes on her cheeks. Lying on the futon during long and dreary days, she wondered why Kakuzu hadn't recognized her then. Maybe their duel had blurred in his memory? Never mind Kakuzu. She had communicated with Edo during the war. Tensei of the Senju brothers, and fought with the resurrected Madara. They had to understand that she was in their time. Her head ached from all these thoughts. She simply realized for herself that she needed to make it so that when moving to their time, they really forgot her. But was it possible to do this? It was time to come to her senses and get out of here. Until this cruel time and catastrophically strong and powerful shinobi grind her into dust. It was unknown who else she would meet here. Madara was sent in Kakuzu's footsteps. A stranger's voice suddenly rang out. A very unexpected guest. What? Uzumaki did not understand, emerging from her thoughts about how to develop a space-time technique. Tobirama was standing on the threshold of her home. His right hand was in a sling. In general, Senju looked much more whole and healthy than herself. It seemed that she saw Tobirama for the first time without his armor and fur collar. He was wearing a simple blue haori with the clan's mon. She even froze, looking at him, so unusual and suspiciously cozy and peaceful. Hashirama sent Madara after Kakuzu. Tobirama repeated patiently, casting an attentive glance at the still too pale Naruto. Oh, was all she could say, feeling the floor beneath her shake and her head spin. He'll definitely finish him off, Uzumaki said sheepishly, not feeling a drop of joy from this. She didn't feel relatively calm for long. The world was threatening to collapse again. Finishing off Kakuzu was a piece of cake for Madara. One heart. They left one heart, forcing him to flee. One swing of the Uchiha scythe and Kakuzu's days were numbered. If he tracks him down? Tobirama noted. Yes, if he tracks her down. Naruto agreed, praying to every god she knew that the Uchiha would fail in his endeavor. And then silence fell between them. Naruto looked at the white blanket, Tobirama looked at Naruto. What are you going to give Hashirama now? Naruto asked, shifting nervously under the younger Senju's gaze. She felt uncomfortable when he looked at her like that, as if he was dissecting her, taking her apart, studying how she worked. What do you mean? Tobirama frowned, catching himself staring indecently at Uzumaki. Her unexpected question brought him out of this strange trance. Let me remind you, you wanted to bring his head as a wedding gift, Uzumaki recalled, breathing a sigh of relief when the pressure of his gaze on her eased. She tried not to look in his direction. He looked too. Not like she was used to. He attracted her gaze with his originality. I'll still have a chance to do this, Senju answered. Are you so sure of Madara's failure? Uzumaki was surprised. She wished she had his confidence. I want to be sure of it, but it seems like for the first time I wish for Madara to complete the task, he said gloomily, staring at the floor. He and Naruto were both on the edge. Hashirama pulled them out, but things could have been really bad. Tobirama could have simply not made it in time. Hashirama could have thrown all his efforts into healing him. Naruto could have turned out to be not so resilient. And living with the knowledge that a girl saved him, sacrificing herself, was annoying. And a little humiliating. How's your arm? Naruto did not ridicule the fact that for the first time Tobirama was rooting for Madara's success. She could understand him. As Hashirama said, it will heal before the wedding. Tobirama allowed himself a smile, a light, barely noticeable one, but a smile. Suddenly he wanted to brighten up this meeting with some ease and a bit of fun. Will it heal before your wedding or his? She smiled in response, asking a clarifying question, while squinting slyly. Maybe while she was lying here, Tobirama found himself a wife. Look, it took Hashirama a week. Jokes aside, but she did not rule out such a possibility. Before his, of course. Tobirama grinned, appreciating her hairpin. Hashirama said that the arm will recover, but with time, the man was grateful to her that she changed the subject. How is your leg? He asked politely, stopping joking. In principle, he came here to ask about her health, and to see with his own eyes that she was on the mend. Her brother said that she was very lucky. Naruto should have died on the battlefield from blood loss. It was nothing more than a miracle that saved her. Better, Hashirama said, maybe there won't even be a scar. Naruto raised herself up on her elbows, and then sat up. Significant weakness confined her to the bed. The large loss of blood was taking its toll. At first, it was hard to even sit, her head was spinning, and not a minute passed before she fell, losing her balance, crushed by the illness. As was her leg. Hashirama strictly forbade her to move it for a while. Tobirama hung there for a while, glancing at the supposed location of her wound on her right leg, hidden by a thin blanket. He was suddenly overcome with such anger. At Kakuzu, first of all. Then at himself. And finally at her. Naruto was expectantly silent, watching the guests rapidly darkening. Now his arrival could be a not very pleasant surprise. Were you afraid of Kakuzu? He asked the question that had been tormenting him for a long time, and all the ease between them blew away like the wind. This was the second reason he came here. Honestly, he regretted that it was necessary to stir up this topic, but he had to understand. He needed to know. This began to occupy all his thoughts. Just a little more, and he would have gone crazy from continuous guesses. His research on jutsu, and his busyness with the Konoha construction project no longer saved him from these thoughts. No, what are you saying? I was not afraid of him. Naruto waved off his somewhat insulting question. The ease between them sank into oblivion. Involuntarily, she sighed sadly, frowning. Then why didn't you warn us in advance about what we would encounter? Tobirama looked at her with such severity that she wanted to hide under the blanket with her head. In particular, from the feeling that she is a kitten that has taken a dump in a slipper and that she will now be taken by the scraper and given a thorough beating. In theory, it was her fault. She should have known that they would most likely find him. But she relied on Tobirama's power and strength, and almost lost. Because she overestimated the second. Most likely, he is not yet in the prime of his powers. He has only just invented Shadow Clone, which he has not really researched. And Edo Tensei Tobirama had an infinite reserve of chakra due to the specifics of the jutsu, which blurred the accurate assessment of the potential of its creator. Failure on all fronts. It's difficult, Naruto said heavily, smoothing out the blanket that had gathered into folds on her knees, trying to collect her thoughts. They, as luck would have it, treacherously ran away. What about teamwork? He asked venomously. That's what I'm talking about. Your secrets almost brought us to the grave. He recalled their very interesting conversation, where she very vehemently insisted that this would reduce the death statistics. I was told by the one who did not even try to play in the team ignoring my help, but he really pressed on the feeling of guilt well. She was even more convinced that her silence led them to this result. It was necessary to tell everything as it was confessed. There are some circumstances that prevent me from being completely frank. Just accept it, she mumbled, embarrassed, looking away. Accept? Circumstances? Difficult? Tobirama was slowly boiling. His right eye twitched nervously in anticipation of a tick. Breathing deeply and heavily, he tried to cool the fire of anger that had opened up after her words. What could be more important than life? But even without that, his red eyes were bloodshot. If both his arms were in perfect health, he would have strangled her. Although the left one was functioning, the echoes of a serious dislocation caused discomfort and a feeling of weakness. She was lucky. What were you thinking? I overestimated you, she answered irritably, squeezing the long-suffering blanket in her fists. She couldn't say that she was thinking not about her own skin, but about the lives of thousands of people. I thought you were so strong that you could easily deal with him. They even make up legends about you. Legends are legends because they are often pure fiction, he interrupted her fiery speech. She overestimated him, look at that. Does this woman even think what she says and how? I really thought you could handle him. That he was within your power. Naruto was embarrassed under his condemning gaze. The great Senju Tobirama. God of Thunder. Genius. But if she doesn't stop throwing around phrases like overrated and in her power, he'll really explode, and all his efforts to suppress his anger will go down the drain. She saved them by taking a mortal risk. Yes, Tobirama would have done the same, he definitely would have, but she stupidly snatched that privilege from under his nose, and made him feel ashamed and a little humiliated. And it was depressing. He was losing his mind with her. His logical thinking often failed him around Naruto. And all because of what? Because of a stupid grudge that she knocked him down in a matter of seconds, and in front of Madara, too? We're both to blame. I for keeping silent, you for simply not being able to accept my help. That's all. The topic is closed, she said firmly, putting an end to this argument. She could have said something, he would have gone on, and nothing good would have come of it for sure. I'm not looking for someone to blame, Tobirama said, taken aback. And then he remembered how Hashirama had scolded him, saying that he and Naruto were two proud idiots. After all, it would have been right to retreat and return with reinforcements, and not fight until they lost their pulse. But it looks like you're looking for someone. Naruto let go of the crumpled blanket, stopping torturing the cotton fabric. It seemed like the storm had passed. How did you understand that clones can transmit information? He abruptly changed the subject, before another wave of anger at his own irrationality washed over him. He needed to move to safer territory immediately. What do you mean? Experimenting, she simply answered. Although her first impulse was to lecture him about the Kagebushin no Jutsu, as Kakashi-sensei once read it to her, but she stopped herself. She would make his work easier here. Have you been experimenting? He was surprised. He wouldn't have guessed that she was eager for discoveries in ninjutsu. Tobirama-sama, excuse me, could you let me pass? Madara-s maid quietly asked, whom Tobirama was blocking the entrance to the room, blocking her with his broad back. Senju was still standing in the passage, as if he couldn't bring himself to go deeper into the room. But now he had to do it. He moved over, somehow timidly and uncertainly crossing the threshold of the room, letting in the girl with a tray. Be so kind as to set the table for two, and if there are fish dishes, bring more, Uzumaki asked, a little embarrassed. And it wasn't the fact that she was practically forcing Senju to stay with her that bothered her, but the fact that she had to voice her request, and she didn't understand how to say it correctly. The girl, acting as a servant, muttered something in agreement under her breath and immediately left. I'm not. Tobirama was about to get indignant. At least, it was clear from his face that Naruto's behavior didn't make him happy. And he was going to refuse 100%. Just come over and sit next to me. I really don't bite. Naruto interrupted his objections. Talking to you while you're propping up the front door isn't very comfortable. Throwing off the blanket from her feet so as not to disturb her injured leg, she carefully crawled to the dining table. But from the outside, her attempts looked awkward and clumsy. Senju, exhaling loudly, took off his shoes, leaving his sandals on the threshold, and walked deeper into the room. His whole appearance expressed displeasure. Relax, the second finally sat down. And if he could cross his arms over his chest, he would have definitely hurried to do so. Everything about him betrayed tension and a desire to distance himself. Naruto suppressed the desire to roll her eyes. Tobirama, tell me, are space-time techniques possible? Purely theoretically, everything is possible, Senju said, raising his gaze from the table and looking at Naruto. So interested and slightly surprised. Space-time jutsu? I'll have to think about it at my leisure. And even the existence of Biju? Uzumaki, taking advantage of the moment, diverted the topic from their unfinished argument, and at the same time from her interest in some jutsu. Nonsense, Tobirama snorted. Do you think so too? Hashirama said it was just a fantasy. To say that she was shocked would be an understatement. All that was left was to ask Madara about the Biju. The Senju turned out to be atheists on this issue. Do you have evidence to the contrary? He looked at her with interest. True, behind the mask of interest there was also mockery. No, I don't, she honestly lied. She was not going to dissuade them from the opposite. But you believe in them. A dry statement of fact from his lips sounded like, what stupidity. But Naruto waved off his skepticism. And why not? Uzumaki reached for her chopsticks. While they were exchanging questions about faith in the tailed beasts, they were set for the table. The food was modest, but it smelled delicious. And her stomach was incredibly cramped from hunger. It was always like this, restoring her strength, a brutal appetite awakened in her. Tobirama looked at the food and his mouth immediately filled with saliva. Most of the appetizers were fish. And he loved fish. Looking at him, Naruto smiled good-naturedly, and her blue eyes sparkled mysteriously. She did not miss the expression with which he looked at all these delicacies. Are you sucking up? He reasonably noted, glancing suspiciously at Uzumaki, returning to his former detachment. It must be admitted, this woman somehow found out that he loved fish. And now she brazenly took advantage of this. It is worth noting, for the second time. Yes and no, she drawled intriguingly. I think you are fundamentally incorruptible. So, trying to buy you with a couple of tasty snacks is not a good prospect, Naruto admitted without any wiggles. But I want to be friends with you. I do not want to have Tobirama himself as an enemy. Senju, she said his name as if she were praying. With reverent awe and undisguised admiration. After all, he was the future second, almost her idol. Like every other Hokage, except for the fourth. She had loved Minato more than anyone else her entire adult life, considering him more heroic. I wouldn't say that you're succeeding, but the attempt counts. Her unctuous voice had a certain effect. Under the feigned crust of ice, the oiled ego stirred. Be careful, there will be many of them. Therefore, I suggest you surrender now to avoid my omnipresent presence. After all, she was betting that she would be able to return home with Senju's help. He was a genius. He would help. And soon Mito would be at hand, with whom she would also be trying to become friends. With the two of them, she would come up with a technique for returning home. I have some influence. And once your leg gets better, you'll be very busy on missions. He parried her threat. And it really sounded like a threat. And her presence was also unsettling, on top of everything else. So she would definitely interfere with his life. What a nasty guy. She snorted discontentedly. Just trust me. You wouldn't be able to resist even if you had Hagoromo as a friend. Otsutsuki. Naruto smiled broadly and wished Tobirama a pleasant appetite and began to eat, otherwise such deliciousness would get cold. I'll get you from under the ground. Tobirama just remained silent, considering that she was taking on too much. And he would be able to get rid of her presence with great ease. And he would prove it to her with great pleasure. True, after he found out who Hagoromo was. Otsutsuki, His name sounded too pompous, with a hint of his greatness and power. Chapter 19. This could have been the best day of her life. A simple piece of iron would have become a sacred kunai for her, which she would pray to every day. But Uzumaki knew that she was already interfering with the flow of time in an outrageous manner, and she reproached herself for it every time. Her entire being was gnawed and bitten by her own conscience. The understanding that it was better not to meddle where it was not necessary turned her off completely when it came to Konoha. All her systems began to fail as soon as she butted into the conversations of adult men, putting in her might. And these men, powerful shinobi, listened to her with their mouths open, taking her opinion into account. At that moment, her pride and self-esteem swelled to unprecedented heights. What can I say? Her desire to be needed and useful was also involved. Roughly speaking, selfishness. Yes, she was all aglow when Hashirama, Madara, and Tobirama listened to her. Especially the last one. But the universe clearly won't stand such a setup and will burst at the seams. Goodbye her past future. Goodbye her so familiar, cozy, and understandable life. Today Naruto Uzumaki herself, by pure chance, saved thousands of lives, and no, she is not exaggerating, and ruined her own. And yet the day had started so well and nothing foreshadowed trouble. Today was a great day. A sunny, clear summer day was inviting and inviting. Inviting her to get out of her abode and go to the training ground and finally practice her natural chakra skills. And she could finally put her weight on her leg. And she would also stretch her muscles. The damage Kakuzu had done was almost completely eliminated. Maybe she should have been afraid of the scorching sun, but Naruto was not a coward. And so, having washed herself with cool water from the well that was on her doorstep every morning, having been carefully carried by her maid, and having eaten every last crumb of breakfast, she tumbled out into the street, happy and content. After several months, Naruto had gotten used to this life. It was not bad here. Quite good. Living in Madara's bosom was quite pleasant and good. Uzumaki was always well-fed, clean, clothed, and almost happy. And in her head was the thought that Madara was not so bad. Especially compared to his distant relative in the person of Sasuke. If she didn't have strict boundaries, because of which she shouldn't interfere in events, she would definitely clear Madara's brains the way only she can, and he would become a good guy. And it doesn't matter that just one look from this Uchiha can lead to pure panic in its best manifestations. It even becomes a pity, but such a person is disappearing. More precisely, he will soon disappear, becoming a crazy maniac. Sighing heavily, she shook her head, driving gloomy thoughts out of her head. No, this day should not be overshadowed by heavy thoughts. The weather is whispering, calling her to go outside, exposing her already tanned face to the gentle and hot rays of the summer sun, squinting her eyes until colored sparks appear, and rejoicing in such little things that she can enjoy to her heart's content in the current circumstances. And Naruto hurries out of the shadow of his home. Madara grimaces as he passes her, hiding under the shade of an umbrella, hiding his alabaster skin from the encroaching sun rays. By the way, he never found Kakuzu, to Naruto's delight. Her bronze tan plunges almost all the Uchiha into awe. Aristocrats. Uzumaki only smiles in response. Brazenly and boldly, ignoring all the contempt that this Uchiha periodically exudes in her direction. If she were so disgusting to him, he would have moved her out long ago. And here it is no longer a question of trust. Most likely, the Uchiha still likes her, which he carefully hides. And Naruto does not hide at all that he admires the local Madara. And he does not even miss his training, enjoying the epic spectacle. Well, and a cool man. Let's face it, in her time there were no such specimens. Perhaps he likes her attention. Unobtrusive and quiet admiration for his strength and power. Well, how quiet. Naruto and quiet are incompatible things in everyday life. At his training, she makes it very clear to everyone who she is rooting for. Having exchanged polite disdain from Madara and a friendly smile from her, they went about their business. Uzumaki tried to bring her senjutsu to perfection. Fortunately, she had a real master of this business at hand, Hashirama Senju. Well, and her own experience, after all. It's just that back then nature chakra was available to her because of the contract with the toads, and here, what toads? Tobirama hadn't invented the Kuchioshi no Jutsu yet. But nature was everywhere. So Naruto was spinning as best she could. Harmony with nature was just begging to be found. Good spirits, great mood, and all that. Having settled down on the sandy field of Madara's home training ground, Naruto got into a fighting stance, holding several kunai in each hand. It was time to learn how to pour Sen chakra into weapons. The shadows were gathering, nipping at her heels. Well, not really. She stood facing the shadows, which were gathering mercilessly, signifying that the day had passed and evening was falling on Konoha. The sun had already hidden behind the trees, not letting the golden rays through to the training ground. Well, that was good. After all, the sun had made her sweat a lot. Or even more. Wiping her forehead, damp with sweat, she repeated the maneuver with the kunai, aiming, but not aiming anywhere in principle. She needed to consolidate the skill of pouring chakra into the weapon, not hitting the targets. The metal did not yield to her Sen chakra. It stood firm, resisting, not letting the energy of nature into itself. Naruto was not angry about this. If he had been angry, then goodbye self-control. Goodbye control of Sen chakra here and now. Perhaps she had nowhere to rush. There are no wars expected here in the next decade. She is only allowed on missions under the strict supervision of Tobirama or Madara. She is not given the chance to prove herself, besides. And the mission with Tobirama showed that she needs to pump up her strength. But Naruto is stubborn. So stubborn that if necessary, she will spend the night at the training ground in order to consolidate her skills or learn a mind-blowing jutsu in a minimum amount of time. And now her stubbornness is bearing fruit. And yet, in the gathering twilight, she pours the energy of nature into the kunai. And releases them aimlessly. She trains hard, making up for the past. And again. And again. And again. Until it comes automatically. Only a nasty smacking sound suddenly prevents her from bringing this action to automatism. Under its quiet, nerve-wracking accompaniment, Uzumaki freezes, forgetting to breathe. It is with this sound that a kunai enters human flesh. It is with this characteristic smacking sound that the weapon digs into the skin, cuts muscles, and draws blood. Naruto, his heart frozen in fear, turns around, looking for the source of the sound. Cold spreads from the top of his head to his very toes. Chaotic apologies and remorse for his own stupidity and carelessness were ready to burst from his tongue, and his legs were ready to carry the random victim to Hashirama for help. But when she spotted the victim with her gaze, the apologies became a prickly lump in her throat, and Naruto felt sick. The kunai was shining in the sunset ray that had managed to find a hole through the tree crowns and was dramatically sticking out with its handle from Black Zetsu's black chest. His yellow round eyes looked at her with horror and panic, and his hands were trying to scrape the kunai out of the wound. But he couldn't grab it. Natural chakra was burning his black palms, and judging by everything, it was moving from the inside. Naruto's eyes also became perfectly round and were ready to roll out of their sockets under the pressure of indescribable surprise. "Serves you right," Naruto hissed maliciously after 10 seconds of complete shock. She hadn't received such satisfaction for a long time. The poor creature writhed in an attempt to pull out what was killing her. She hissed, cursed, hissed again, then howled. Naruto rushed to Zetsu, pulling out another kunai, soaking it with Sen chakra, intending to drive the deadly metal into him herself. And preferably more than once. Until he died at her feet, pitifully whining in agony. But the raised hand froze literally a millimeter from the black creature's chest. Unbridled, insane happiness gave way to pure panic. Zetsu ingloriously cursed her with all his might and cried. Cried for his mother, whom he could not pull out. No, he did not cry. But howled. Howled at the outlines of the moon, barely visible in the approaching twilight. A kunai fell from a trembling hand. Naruto reached for the black one's chest in a panic, pulling out the weapon and clutching the black hole on the black body. "Don't die, don't die!" She chattered fearfully, but no blood gushed from the hole. The hole was just a hole. True, a hole that brought death to this creature of God. Are you kidding me, right? Naruto shouted to the sky, shaking all over and trying to figure out how to patch up this hole, from which not only the life of the Kaguya sun was flowing, but also her future. The future from which she came. Naruto, under the noise of her pulse, madly pounding on her eardrums, could practically hear the universe itself collapsing. But Zetsu was already barely groaning. Poisonous yellow eyes were clouding, losing their life. And it seemed that his body was melting. Naruto was upset every time she interfered with the chain of events. She scolded herself. She was dying from thinking about what would happen to her other life if she had such an impact on this one. But now, she had personally destroyed the world she had left. No, she hadn't destroyed it yet, as long as this one was breathing. Live you. Uzumaki was already shaking him, praying to all the gods that he would not die. But the spark of life in his eyes was hopelessly fading, and his head was shaking helplessly. The black liquid that was his body stuck disgustingly to his hands. The place in the area of the hole from the kunai bubbled, hissed. "Mom, forgive me," he croaked hoarsely, looking longingly at the moon. And a second later he fell silent and began to melt, giving up the ghost. Somewhere there on the periphery of her hearing, dogs howled piteously at the full moon. Naruto used her palms to gather the black puddle, which had previously been nasty and cunning, preventing it from spreading across the ground. As if this would somehow change the situation. As if this would help her bring Zetsu back. Naruto suddenly burst out laughing. Hysterically. She was trying to save this one, who had sacrificed thousands and thousands of people for his plan. She, the heroine of the war, who had fought this universal evil, was saving him. It couldn't be more absurd. And again a fit of hysterical laughter. Having smeared the black goo that her no longer future enemy had turned into across her face, she continued to burst into mad laughter. This was a gift from fate. Yes. A gift. Killing Zetsu completely by accident. Evil of a universal scale, mowed down by a randomly thrown kunai. 5 minutes and it would be done. There would be no mass genocide. There would be no race for the tailed beasts. The Uchiha would live. Sasuke won't be a moral jerk. Madara will die peacefully of old age or a hero on some mission. Maybe Rin won't die. Obito, even if he survives, won't become one. Jiraiya won't go into a deadly showdown with his student. Her parents will be more alive than all the living, because the embittered Obito won't unleash it on Konoha. Kyuubi. Shikamaru and Ino won't mourn their fathers, Hinata won't lose her brother. The list goes on and on. She's just broken a chain of deaths. In 5 fucking minutes. A chain of blood and hatred that stretched for centuries and took thousands of lives. But she's just started another, completely unknown chain of other events. Her fate is a merciless bitch. And she won't hear her irony, but there's no point in it. In Naruto's opinion, it's a bad joke. Get it together. She slapped herself on the cheek. And again. And once more, smearing black goo across her face. And hysterical laughter continued to mercilessly burst from her throat. Tearing her hands away from her face, she once again tried in vain to gather the spreading Zetsu into a pile. To no avail. The hysteria passed, there was a lull. Naruto looked sullenly at the black puddle of an incomprehensible substance, which, according to the laws of nature, was absorbed into the ground, like any other liquid. Very accurately observed, Madara said, passing by. But I hope it's not it. He twisted his face full of disgust, stopping behind Naruto, who was sitting in a suspicious black puddle that had appeared out of nowhere. My life, Uzumaki declared in a sepulchral tone, and getting up from her knees, on complete autopilot, she walked towards her house, ignoring the questioning look from Madara. To kill the universal evil by pure chance. The evil that lurked in the shadows lived an outrageously long life, nurtured bloodthirstiness in the Uchiha, and managed to manipulate events to suit its plans, making the most powerful shinobi in the world a pawn. With a kunai. It's hard to believe in something like this because of the epic absurdity squared. Naruto, followed by Madara's gaze, laughed hysterically again. Chapter 20. Uzumaki was grieving for a couple of days after, scaring everyone around her. Sobbing. Lying there, exhausted, staring blankly at the ceiling. Then sobbing again. She didn't think she would mourn Zetsu's death so zealously and desperately. His death had knocked her down. After all, everything, absolutely nothing would be the same. And somehow the fact that she had saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives, didn't sweeten the bitter pill. Her whole life had simply sunk into oblivion. No matter how hard she tried to descend into her subconscious, to also throw a tantrum under Kurama's ear, seeking support in the furry lump of her biju, it didn't work. The emotional turmoil didn't even let her sleep, let alone immerse herself in a meditative state. Well, and then she realized that her hands were no longer tied. That Zetsu's century-old conspiracy hadn't even really begun, stalling at Madara's cultivation. Her hands weren't tied. Freedom looming on the horizon hurried to open its comforting arms, promising to warm and caress. Naruto's entire being clung to this thought like a lifeline. His heart, buried under tons of grief and sorrow, perked up and began to beat so cheerfully, so perky. Freedom of action. This meant freedom of action. And the work front. Naruto sat up abruptly, her spirits revived. Her eyes glittered feverishly, looking not at the door, but at the prospects that this very freedom opened up. And her first thought was not to run to Madara, starting the meticulous process of returning the Uchiha to the ranks of good, but to rush into the forest. In the footsteps of Kakuzu. You need to start small. Madara can wait. And Kakuzu. He won't wait for her revenge. She's probably looking for a heart. She needs to urgently prevent more deaths. And take revenge. For Asuma's death that never happened. For Shikamaru's pain that has sunk into oblivion. And for her and Tobirama's most natural wounds. Naruto got ready quickly and left the Uchiha quarter unnoticed, as befits an elite ninja. And she finally found Kakuzu after a day of wandering through the forest. Somewhere on the border of the Land of Fire, in a small civilian village. And her revenge was sweet and inexplicably cruel. After all, Kakuzu had fallen into her hot hand, filling out paperwork with a cast on his arm, which Hashirama had forgotten to do again, was a real pain. He couldn't write properly, or even just fold the papers into neat piles. It was annoying. The day had already been bad, and then, as luck would have it, Naruto had disappeared. The first thing Tobirama heard when he came into his office was Madara's swearing that this damn woman had disappeared again. And he noticed her disappearance too late. Naruto had been gone from home for more than a few days. Lately, she had often disappeared during training, spending the night right on the training ground. That's why the Uchiha didn't immediately miss her. So, Uzumaki Naruto had escaped from under Madara's nose with unprecedented ease. That's probably why Madara was furious. Yes. Furious. He had flatly and loudly refused to run around the forest looking for the missing girl. And since Hashirama trusted the girl so much, let her run free. Maybe she would get mad and come running back as if nothing had happened. Uchiha had made it clear that he didn't want to be responsible for the girl, and let his best friend and loyal comrade reap the fruits of his decision. Tobirama, however, admitted the thought that Naruto hadn't run off to denounce, but had rushed off to commit outright nonsense. Gradually getting to know her, he realized that it suited her better. True, maybe she was lying somewhere under a bush, all alone, covered in blood and wounded, with no hope of help, dying in proud solitude. Damn that Madara, who had voiced his opinion too loudly about this. Knocked him off his job. But his thoughts were static. He thought and thought about Naruto and the situation as a whole. It was none of his business what she was doing there, having escaped. None of his, he assured himself. Kami-sama. He thought too much about her. But at the moment Senju was not going to help anyone or catch anyone. It all depended on her motives for escaping. It was enough that he had dragged her back, although they were both seriously injured. It was partly her fault that he was sitting here in a cast. He had carried her in his arms, not thinking of an alternative, because time was running out on him. He still had not recovered, unlike her, judging by her grueling training. The shattered bone could not heal properly. Hashirama had already broken his arm twice to set the bone. And she only got the benefit of the doubt because she saved his life by attacking an enemy ninja at the last moment, which caused him to lose another heart. So Tobirama definitely shouldn't worry. She can take care of herself quite well. Unless, of course, Madara was worried about her health, and not about the fact that his mistress was definitely a spy who ran away when her adult, powerful, and intimidating nanny relaxed. His thoughts were mercilessly interrupted by Naruto, who burst into the office and was covered in blood. She was breathing heavily and looked at the younger Senju with an unreadable gaze, and then sighed heavily and threw the bag with blood flowing from it on the floor. "What's this?" He glanced sideways at the suspicious bag, and then looked closely at the disheveled and dirty Uzumaki. "Calm down, the main thing is to be calm." But the streaks and blood stains on her clothes and skin made it difficult to keep her cool. "A gift from Ito," she said proudly, smiling widely. She even straightened up, and squared her shoulders. She was almost bursting with self-esteem. What a great girl she was. Tobirama looked worriedly from Naruto to the bag and back. He didn't understand what was happening. His gaze expressed an unspoken question. "What other gift for the demons?" "It's the head." The gears in his own head began to spin with an uncharacteristic grinding sound. The surprise effect was dissipating, no longer blinding his usually clear and sober mind. "Yeah." She nodded her head cheerfully, smiling widely. Naruto looked very pleased. And she was definitely trying to get praise, but Tobirama, being a genius, for some reason did not understand that she absolutely had to be thanked for a job well done, verbally patting her pride on the head. "That same ninja who wounded us?" Senju clarified just in case, turning his gaze to the bloody bag. No, he did not want to believe it. "Yeah." Naruto did not pay attention to the fact that Tobirama was being blunt. She was happy. Very, very happy. Nothing lifts the mood like a successful hunt for enemies. Even if then this same enemy will have to cut off his head himself, stuff it into a bag and drag it on himself for a good half a day in order to ceremoniously hand it to Tobirama. "And you brought it to me as a gift from Mito?" "Alone." "Alone?" She walked alone. Convulsively beat in his head, adjusting to the rhythm of the suddenly twitching eyelid. Unfortunately, he couldn't share Naruto's joy, even if the bag contained Kakuzu's head. "Consider it our joint gift," she stubbornly ignored his mood. Adrenaline mixed with endorphins was still boiling in her blood. She got a huge dose of her personal doping. And most importantly, she was distracted. And she took revenge. And they say that revenge is a waste of time and energy, and does not quench the thirst for blood. They are all lies. She feels great. "And why the hell did you go after him yourself?" he muttered through clenched teeth. He was overcome with anger. Did she even have a head on her shoulders? It seemed so. And brains? Where were her brains? He should yell at her now, accusing her of unprecedented stupidity. To go after an opponent superior to the two of them put together, alone. How this fact affected him. And he didn't understand. Was he more worried about her safety and security, or was he angry that she, without anyone's help, had found, killed, and brought him the criminal's head? It hurt his pride a little. Well, he only had one heart left, so the risk was minimal. She justified herself, finally noticing that things were getting hot. The enthusiasm for victory began to wane. Fatigue set in. The world no longer seemed so bright and smiling. And Tobirama had turned on the mumbling mode. It would have been better if he had rejoiced with her at her victory. And he... It upset her a little. And if he had more than 5 hearts? Tobirama, if he had such an ability, would have definitely taken advantage of the moment, replenishing what was lost, even if the hearts he had obtained did not meet his needs. He was sincerely amazed at her carelessness. No. She waved away the accusations that were hidden behind his question, like an annoying fly. "I know for sure that it's 5. So I decided that we need to act now. Kakuzu is very ambitious, he won't bother just anyone," she said with an important look, crossing her arms over her chest. She had been straining her veins here, bothering this greedy man, to please Tobirama. Okay, not only for him. First of all, for herself, but she also wanted to curry favor with Tobirama. And anyway, you can grumble at me later, huh? I'm tired. She exhaled heavily, having spent the last of her strength on her fiery speech. And, falling silent, Naruto fell to the floor like a sack, joining the sack with Kakuzu's head. Tobirama suppressed another heavy sigh, massaged the bridge of his nose, got up from the table and went to pick up Naruto. She had prepared a gift, yeah? A joint one. And she was obviously wounded. You couldn't tell from the thin layer of blood smeared over her clothes and skin whether she had serious wounds. Maybe exhaustion? Her brother had said something about a strangely regenerating reserve. And he, dumbfounded by this fact, couldn't immediately notice that her chakra was weak and her reserve was almost empty. Hashirama, I need your help, Tobirama shouted, lifting Naruto into his arms and leaving the office. He was unlikely to be able to work today, but he definitely needed to talk to Naruto. Tobirama, sitting next to Naruto, tried to imagine how she cold-bloodedly cuts off Kakuzu's head. So fragile, miniature, compared to him, and to the same Kakuzu, but however, she had enough strength to cut off his head. Senju could only guess whether she did it while the enemy ninja was breathing, or whether she was beheading an already cold corpse. It seemed that he was beginning to feel respect for her. And to think about the fact that it was worth keeping her not under Madara's nose, but under his own. To avoid embarrassment. Or her own death, which would be a consequence of her stupidity. The thought stunned him. He blinked in surprise and immediately asked himself why the hell he was thinking about preserving her life. At what point did he start worrying about it? Just recently he was ready to cut her at the first opportunity to avoid a vile betrayal on her part. There were too many secrets around her. And there still are. There you go! He hurried to get up and leave. Away from this Uzumaki, who was starting to take up too much space in his head. And now she was lying here, all pale, weak and vulnerable, evoking compassion in him with her pitiful appearance. Did you turn me off? She croaked hoarsely, barely opening her dry lips. Naruto was in no hurry to open his eyes, experiencing a headache. She felt Tobirama's presence on her skin. His oppressive aura unpleasantly pinched her skin. Ask your questions, but first bring me a glass of water, Naruto unceremoniously asked. Tobirama did not have time to leave. Run away from her and her appearance, which was too disturbing for his soul. The temptation to ask the questions that were just coming to his tongue was unbearably great. If you can call it that. Tobirama massaged the bridge of his nose with his fingers, intensely considering whether to leave or stay. Now have I earned your trust? Naruto opened her eyes and turned her head towards Senju, who was frozen at the front door. His trust. But did she need it now? When everything had become irreversible? She no longer needed help developing the jutsu. So it was unlikely. But it threatened to become her goal. Just out of principle. And for fun. Your attempts to curry favor with me scare me, he said tiredly and sincerely. He simply did not know what to do with such suffocating attention. Ha! She grinned cheerfully and somehow maliciously, and then began to cough. The desert in her mouth did not magically disappear on its own. A dry cough mercilessly tore at her throat. Exhaling deeply, Tobirama humbly turned around and walked to the nightstand, where a simple clay jug and the same glass stood forlornly. By the way, Naruto was in a temporary hospital, hastily put together by Hashirama and not yet fully equipped. After Tobirama and Naruto returned from a mission barely alive, Senju Sr. decided that it was necessary to take up the issue of medicine in earnest. Not in his office, in the future residence of the head of the village, to knit broken bones, stitch up lacerations, do blood transfusions and perform complex operations. There was a very high risk of splashing important state documents with blood. Well, and complete unsanitary conditions. Having filled a glass with water to the brim, Senju handed it to Naruto, who was in a fit of coughing. He was not going to help her anymore. Deciding to take the position of an observer, watching how she, with hands trembling from weakness, poured water, brought the glass to her dry, cracked lips, spilling it. Thin, transparent streams traced wet stripes along her sharp chin, flowed down her throat, brazenly capturing his gaze with a wet shine. Tobirama swallowed convulsively and quickly looked away before Naruto noticed what a mistake he had made. Pursing his lips, frowning, he looked anywhere but at Uzumaki. "I've never chopped off anyone's head before," she suddenly admitted in a voice slightly hoarse after coughing. "It was disgusting." Naruto winced, remembering the process. Yes, she did it without hesitation, but it was disgusting. "I was speaking figuratively about the head then." Senju's expression immediately changed. The frowning crease on the bridge of his nose was smoothed out by pure surprise. His eyebrows crawled up. And then he quietly laughed, unable to contain the laughter tickling him from within. Did she really take the head thing seriously? Is that why he has Kakuzu's severed body part lying on the floor in his office? Did I have to carry his corpse on my back? "I'm a girl," she muttered resentfully, hiding her rapidly reddening face in the shadow of her bangs. Naruto sincerely believed that if he was talking about a head, then it was the head that was needed. So Kakuzu had to kunai already useless to saw off the head. Then Uzumaki understood what happiness, that the abilities of a shinobi are a blessing of heaven. Offering a prayer to the gods, she with the help of wind chakra, giving the kunai more strength and sharpness, without any problems turned this dirty business and, filled with joy, stuffed her prey into a bag. Now suddenly it became very awkward. "You are a shinobi," Tobirama said moralizingly, suppressing such inappropriate fun, returning to his face a mask of severity and restraint. But laughter was scratching him from within, asking to get out. However, this woman amused him. "I would not hurt his corpse." To examine the body, as if casually he noted. Kakuzu's abilities aroused the interest of a scientist in Senju. He wanted to understand how his thread jutsu worked. "You know what?" Uzumaki seethed, biting her tongue so as not to send Tobirama on a long walk back to where he had come out into the world from. Full of shame, anger, and disappointment. Instead of praising her for a job well done, and he even ridiculed her. Gritting her teeth, she abruptly turned away from him, almost burying her nose into the wall, and covered herself with a blanket almost over her head, seriously hinting that she was tired and wanted to be alone. They would not make friends, comrades, or even acquaintances. Even neutrality would not work. Paw on him! May they drag him to Yomi! Tobirama understood the hint and immediately left, feeling some relief and the slightest bit guilty for not appreciating her efforts as they deserved.